Hi everyone, this is Selena. I am your host for this podcast called Designing Activism. I just wanted to put a preface in front of this inaugural episode and talk a little bit about what my whole platform is for the podcast in general. So the purpose of the podcast is to kind of support my initiative as a 2019 advocate in the AIAS advocate program. My topic is a little bit different. It's not necessarily related directly to design, but it's related mostly to the idea of advocacy in general. So my topic revolves around the idea of quote-unquote empty activism, which is something that I kind of made up, but it's something that I've noticed throughout my years as an AIAS member and as an observer of those who are great and perhaps not so great advocates. So the idea of empty activism, like the term, is something I completely made up, but it is the act of advocating for something without clear purpose and actions, whether that be intentionally or unintentionally. So once again, that's the act of advocating for something without clear purpose and actions. So the reason why I bring the topic to the attention of the organization and to the listeners of this podcast is not necessarily to kind of induce a crisis or make anyone reconsider what they have advocated for, but it's to kind of encourage efficient advocacy, following these kind of three ideas that I've also sort of made up. One, which is picking your battles, so picking the ones that kind of can create the most change as it relates to you, making sure you consider all parts of the battle and considering feasibility. So pick the right one, essentially. The next is choosing your channels. So there's so many different channels that you can go through these days, and being in AIS, you may already be taking the right step forward in this area, but you have to remember that you can't just complain to anyone. You have to start speaking to the right people. And lastly is to measure your goals. So like any good advocacy initiative, it is really important to consider the real life impacts of your thoughts and ideas and what you may be complaining about. So you should always be able to reflect on something that you're advocating for and consider, what did I actually do? Like what's different now? And if you can't do that, you probably haven't advocated successfully. So I'm not necessarily criticizing advocacy or activism in general, but I'm just trying to bring attention to the idea that not every advocate can be an efficient one. So that's my spiel, and continuing on with the episode. Thank you guys. Also, one last side note that I also forgot to mention. For those who don't know, AIAS means the American Institute of Architecture Students. So, all right, now for the episode. Hi, everyone. This is the inaugural episode of a podcast called Designing Activism. My name is Selena Zhen, and I'm from Carnegie Mellon University. And I am here kind of hosting this podcast as an advocacy initiative for my 2019 advocate program. So I'm going to introduce my guests, who are Tim Hawk, Chitika Vasudeva, and Ethan Moore. You guys want to just say something?
Sure,
super
yeah.
quick?
Thank you for having me. I'm Tim Hawk. I am an architect in Columbus, Ohio, and I am currently serving as the liaison on the AIAS board to the AIA. And within the AIA, I serve as the National Governance Advocacy Committee Chair.
Exciting.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Chitika. I am chapter president at AIAS Carnegie Mellon, and in terms of advocacy, I have served on the 2017-2018 National AIAS Advocacy Task Force, and this past year co-chaired the 2018-2019 AIAS National Resiliency Task Force.
I'm Ethan. I'm a vice president at Kent State University. I recently started and have chaired for the past 2 years now our local advocacy task force at our chapter. And I just wrote an article on that for the national website, which could be a supplemental resource if you're looking to expand your advocacy efforts.
Yeah, cool. So like I was saying before, I kind of brought you guys here specifically because I want to talk about different avenues within advocacy, particularly, I guess, within education, because that's what most of you guys are related to. So, yeah, Chitika, do you want to kind of talk about your path and how you kind of got into this, because it's relatively new?
Sure, yeah. I first heard about the national committees at Grassroots 2017, and in fact, this year's committees have just gone out for our listeners to know, so that's a little plug. But I really just gravitated towards the National Advocacy Task Force because of, advocacy in the title, and over time started to learn what a good resource the National Committee was, to start to learn what it means to be an advocate and what kind of platforms there are to do that. I think the advantage of that was that AIS National has a lot of kind of presence and influence and resources, and it kind of is rewarding to become a part of an organization that has an established advocacy platform, because it not only gives you kind of a leg up, but you also really learn a lot from people that are around you. So that's kind of how I've come to where I am now, where working with other kind of fellow advocates, I've come to define what that means to me and why it's important.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that you can kind of see that in your path, like what you've started to do just within our own chapter as well, and locally within our Pittsburgh area. So, yeah.
Yeah, to me, it seems like it's a really great opportunity for students to stand out and diversify their engagement beyond just studio courses or structures or drawing. And the reality is, I recognized when I was emerging professional and a student that things weren't really the way I wanted them to be. Like I wanted to have people around me to provide a voice. And I think starting when you're a student to have thoughts and consider things and discuss like you're talking is really important. Mm-hmm. And I know, Ethan, you feel like, you're saying you've gotten a lot of benefit out of it at Kent.
Yeah, we've gotten some really tremendous benefit out of it at Kent. From a fundraising standpoint, people are very willing to partner with us on advocacy-related events, and really any event, because we have an advocacy committee, and we're dedicated to advocating. We started the committee because we felt that there was more we could be doing, and there was more that we could be participating in, and that our voice could be maybe heard a little louder than what we had been doing.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to think about how we are all on committees, but in very different ways, and those committees themselves are really different.
And also different scales.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
It's extremely different scales.
I would kind of compare our experience, and I think that would be cool because we are all both working with students, Ethan and I, but he's at Kent, which is like at the chapter scale, and I have to interact with AIS members from all over the country, which really changes how we what we learn and what we talk about, because sometimes I find myself explaining so much about what happens at CMU and what my background is, and kind of all of us have to do a lot of background sharing to come to an understanding about each other, and you probably don't have to do that as much, but there's also the trade-off of you learn different things, so I don't know if you want to.
But Ethan is saying that he is diversifying his discussions through dialogue with professionals as well, which I think is really important. And one of the things that we talked about earlier today was diversifying the discussion to talk to allied professionals. So students who are in design disciplines that are not necessarily architecture. I think there's a lot of similarities, and you can learn from those discussions and bring things back. So the national perspective is really strong. I think there's the perspective that you get from interfacing with professionals. And I think there's also that perspective you get from talking to other students who are in similar majors.
Yeah, definitely. And coming here, I think just talking to other advocacy people here, and especially after giving the Story Slam, a lot of people have surprisingly come up to a lot of the advocates and been very supportive of the same ideas. So it's reassuring to know that these ideas aren't completely, falling on deaf ears in a lot of ways.
And, one of the things I've found is I feel like my advocacy efforts are impacting my design. in a good way. So they're giving me tools to help have empathy for client situations or recognize through interface with other leaders across the country that there are different ways to approach a problem. So I've become much more aware of the relevance of resilient design on my practice in Columbus, where a few years ago I probably would have never really considered that to be important. And now I recognize that there are issues with deep buildings where there's no ventilation. There are issues with limited access to water or backup electrical systems that are necessary. I would have never known that without participating in an advocacy dialogue.
Yeah, and now that you kind of are aware of the situation, you're kind of putting it to use through practice at least. So that's sort of the more professional activism kind of.
But I think it would impact your design in studio as well.
Yeah, definitely.
It definitely
Right?
has been for me.
Yeah.
It has?
Absolutely.
So what's an example?
Realizing that your voice doesn't necessarily have to be the loudest just because it's your voice and you feel like you may know everything about a specific topic. Interfacing with people who have varied backgrounds and different experiences and bring other points of view to the table, and really allowing for collaboration leads to much better design.
Just work overall. Yeah, I think that's so interesting because like what you mentioned, Tim, is what Selena's been talking about or is using this platform to advocate for, which is this really like tangible, actionable element of advocacy, which so many of us struggle with, because I know I did when I started,
right?
Where I kind of had no idea where this conversation would go, and I think I was just expecting to kind of talk every once in a while and feel good about like
talking.
Yeah, like we all agree this is a problem. Cool, let's go home now.
Yeah, but not do anything about it.
Yeah, and I think that comes from a place of not always knowing what you can do about it, and something as kind of like for something like that to trickle right into something like your studio work, because you've just learned to collaborate and like listen to other voices and kind of even carry yourself in a way that helps you just push for things that you think are important, or learn to back your ideas up with facts and figures and like more actionable plans. I just thought it was interesting because you guys talked about like in some ways very different but very related kind of outcomes of advocating effectively. Yeah,
the other thing that I've noticed through advocacy is you begin to get the input of non-architects and bring them into the discussion. So a lot of times, like when we were on the Hill the other day, you're seeing how your concerns are resonant with people who are not necessarily architects, and you're also building their knowledge of your importance. And
sorry guys, we just had to we just had to tell the board of directors to shut up. So if you can imagine that conversation now, it's great. Continue what we were talking about.
You were talking about Capitol Hill Day.
And the diversity of opinion and outside viewpoints and all that kind of stuff. And the other thing, so I come from a place of a lot of experience and practice, but one of the things I didn't recognize when I was a student is the amount of outside influences that impact design. So, for instance, right now in the AIA, we're trying to roll out a new policy on codes, which we want to influence all the building officials and governments in every state. So you've got 50 states who all have to enact legislation and new building codes, and all 50 of those states contribute to energy reduction in buildings, and we're trying to move the needle so that the energy reduction programs help to contribute to our 2030 commitment, which is trying to go towards net zero. So that's a tremendous effort that needs to be done, and we are not going to be able to get it done without student voices at the table. And the more voices we have in dialogue, the better success we'll have. And I guess one other thing I think is really important to say, and maybe you guys can speak to this, is that I always thought it was like so overwhelming that it wasn't worth going into. There was so much to do that you just feel
What
like
is
it's
overwhelming?
the whole process of
Oh.
like trying to get anything done.
Right. Okay.
So it's like, oh, why bother? It's so overwhelming.
Yeah.
But you just have to start. It's like a diet program or an exercise
I think in some ways the dieting is harder.
program.
I would do advocating and student Hill Day before.
Do you guys want to reflect on Student Hill Day, though?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I think that's a really important part of, like, effective advocacy in a lot of ways. And you guys were on the same team going to the same delegates, right?
We were.
Yeah.
Yeah,
How
Tim
was
missed
it?
out on the party. But
Yeah.
I was on a different one, but go ahead.
I think it was one of the most impactful things I've ever done. To be able to go to people who are willing to listen to what you have to say and your thoughts on the matter. And then to be able to watch it actually make a difference and make people's lives better was really just an incredible experience.
Yeah, I agree. I was actually really conflicted and kind of nervous going in because
I think a lot of people were, yeah.
Well, yeah, part of it is I mean, I don't think the issue is like charged per se as much as some other things could be, but as an international student, I felt kind of confused about, my like role in the situation and my ability to be impactful and almost my right to be there.
But I don't know if they're going to know you probably need to tell people.
Yes, I was just going to get to it.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So we, just for some background, we were meeting kind of staffers in the Senate and the House to push for Bill
Senate
1428.
Bill 1428.
Yeah, which is, God, I forgot what it was.
It's essentially to...
right. So
change retirement plan.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
So it was addressing the issue of student debt by kind of creating an option for people to employers to match people's payments to where it's their student loans, and then kind of match that by putting
it into their retirement plan.
Retirement plan.
Yeah. So
That was
instead
not
of
very eloquent, but-
so typically, if you want to put money towards your like 401k, you would put a certain percentage into your 401k, and then your employer would match that percentage into your 401k. But this allows basically red tape to be taken out to allow the employer to match a percentage of someone's. Say you would want to put your like 4% towards your student loans, and then they could match 4% put into your 401k. So instead of only planning for like the future, or only taking care of the past, you can do that at the same time. So it's kind of a complicated topic, actually.
Yeah, it was hard to understand. So there was some of that, which was intimidating.
Yeah.
And then part of it was, like I was saying, I just kind of felt like I wasn't sure if I was the right person to be there talking about it. But thankfully, my fellow advocates reminded me that like it's important to discuss things that are important to other people, and I kind of rationalized it as well. Just because I don't go here and go through the same processes doesn't mean that my friends and colleagues and peers would not benefit from this.
I definitely thought it was interesting going into a campaign that was already created for us instead of kind of like campaigning for something that you've created. Because, I mean, that's something that I've typically seen just in AIAS. Like for example, Chitika, you've always, like, advocated for something that you've created through the committees. But this is something that we're going into, like, as a third party, which I thought was really cool. So.
Well, what I thought was cool is that we had these experts at the National AIA who had done all the research, and they had found the correct bill that would be able to be supported in a bipartisan way. So my group went in, we spoke to both a Republican and a Democrat, and both of them responded positively. The Republican said we felt we should be doing more in a broader way, and the Democrat felt that this was the right bill, but they both supported it. But one of the things that I think is interesting is that I don't even know if you guys know this, but yesterday, the AIA issued a social media blast on LinkedIn and other things. And there were members of the AIA who were going on to that LinkedIn and making negative statements about what the students had done.
Really?
And yeah, they were
Interesting.
saying
That's
they were
very
saying
interesting.
like,
Yeah.
oh, these students don't want to pay for their national debt, their debt. They are trying to get out of their debt, etc. And they are so uninformed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
what's
Because
interesting, that's like not at all what the bill is
it's
about.
not at all what
Yeah.
the bill is what. So
Yeah.
the other interesting lesson
Mhm.
that I got out of it was that there is a complete sort of knee-jerk reaction by a lot of people where they don't want to really understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Right?
there's definitely a reluctance to educate yourself, and
Yeah.
which is not to say kind of, I'm not trying to like dismiss anyone's reactions to the overall issue, but I think even as an advocate, sometimes you have to push yourself to do research and kind of figure out what you're getting into.
Yeah.
Especially because you have to combat kind of half information and like, no information sometimes coming in from opposition, and a lot of the times when you clarify the facts, people are on board, and we also met with both a Democrat and a Republican, and we did our research on both of them, and we had different approaches to how we talked to them and got different reactions from them, but ultimately they were both really positive, which was really I think in a large part a success of just us doing our homework and knowing what we were talking about.
Mhm.
So
I just find it so interesting that, like, no offense, but like older members of like the field would react so negatively to students pushing for something that affects, I guess, more us, but
Mhm.
also like potentially would affect our kids, because this is not just for architecture students; it's
Mhm.
for all students, all loan types, and just student loan debt in general. So,
Yeah, well, the whole point behind the advocacy initiatives are to begin to have that dialogue and discussion.
mhm.
So you now become aware that people have a different opinion about you,
Yeah.
about the issue. And I think that's actually as important as going in and talking to the people
Yeah.
in Capitol Hill.
yeah, I agree. I
Yeah.
think it can be really hard to ask for opinions from your peers sometimes,
Right.
on especially an issue that can be charged, and then discover that perhaps you're in the minority.
But-
But that's part of the process, and like
Yeah, and the other thing too is what you find is that some of these professionals believe very strongly that you as a student should have the same experience or rite of
Mhm.
passage that they have had. And they have a lack of awareness that it's not an equivalent right. So my college education at a public institution cost $3,500 a year. The same education now costs $20,000.
Or more.
And I was able to make $10 an hour in the summer working. And now that same job would only pay like 15. So it's not an equivalent situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a difficult topic to talk to or talk about, I think, and it's I almost wish we could talk to like these people that you're like talking about, like these older members of AIA or anyone who doesn't like professionals in general, which might be something that you do on a chapter level. With an advocacy committee, right?
Right, and that's right. I mean, have you found that you've had really strong conversations with the professionals in the Northeast Ohio area?
Oh, absolutely. I think we've made some really great strides towards educating ourselves and getting opinions, but also educating people who maybe don't look at things the same way that we do, kind of leveling the playing field and getting everybody the same information, I guess.
Yeah.
Today I had a student approach me and ask how he could get involved with advocacy. And I told him the first step would be he was actually asking specifically about how to get involved with advocacy at the AIA level.
Oh,
and
that's cool.
He goes to school at Wentworth, and I told him, that's the Boston Society of Architects.
Yeah.
You just need to do research on it and go down and get engaged. And they have committees, and I'm sure they would accept you as a leader of your student chapter.
Yeah. Sometimes all you really need to do is take the first step. And if there's pushback, there's always ways around it and encouragement from other places. But I know, like, Chitika, you and I have at least tried, or are currently trying to build a relationship or rebuild a relationship with our chapter, which is in AIA Pittsburgh. But I think, like, Ethan's example of kind of creating an advocacy committee kind of creates a legitimacy to that sort of
that effort.
yeah. And if any kind of other chapters are struggling with that, that might be a way to go. So
yeah, I think the value proposition, question becomes really important, where what are you doing to create value or kind of increase perceived value of yourself and your chapter and like you as a voice in the community, so that other people pay attention to you and listen to you. And whether that means you have a committee that kind of like hosts events and does outreach, or you kind of just like, pursue other avenues and like do whatever it takes to establish your own street cred, so to speak. Boardroom cred, I don't know. I did want to say though, Tim, what you said about kind of the disconnect between perhaps slightly more experienced, or well, actually significantly more experienced professionals and kind of young students, is that I think it ties into this some not as often talked about issue with advocacy and activism, is that we find it difficult to push for or care about things that we haven't experienced. And part of that is, empathy is hard.
Being comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yeah. Like, it's difficult to, like you said, it's the kind of route that people take is they like find platforms that allow them to raise awareness about something that they care about. But it's so interesting to think about something like the advocacy experts at the AIA, or like lobbyists that some of us worked with, where their job is to like focus on the process of advocating for something,
the persuasive process.
And you can, it's kind of like the issue is almost assigned to you, or you have to find like a buy-in and say, well, this is worth pushing for, even though it's not coming directly from my life experience.
Yeah, I definitely think that overall, like, a lot of this conversation has just been talking about like the correct platform that you choose, and I mean that's sort of what I was talking about in my topic as well. Like, what platform do you choose? What channels do you choose to do that on? And most of it, at least everything that we've talked about, best suits like what you are best suited for. Like, Tim works obviously with AIA, so he's best suited for that sort of platform. But us students at our level, we kind of Capitol Hill was like one of our first best platforms to do that sort of thing. So, and I know so many people that are really interested in doing more advocacy even at like the state level because of Capitol Hill Day.
Yeah, so, I think it's important to be sensitive to the issue as well. I mean, for you to, this platform of the 2019 Advocates Program is allowing you to like a lot of flexibility and just giving you a resource to discuss something that matters to you, as opposed to what and we also are doing advocacy through AIAS when we did Student Hill, but that was a whole different experience where, like you said, the issue was kind of predetermined and handed to us, and we were relying on our platform for knowledge about what we were advocating for. So even within an organization, and maybe you can comment on whether the AIA has offered a similar experience or set of experiences where you can be an AIAS advocate in so many different ways as well. So.
Well, AIA, you guys did a Tim, you guys did an AIA Capitol Hill Day too, didn't you?
We did, yeah.
Was it on the same topic as we did, or was it on a different topic? Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, we did a Capitol Hill Day on two topics. One was energy reduction in buildings, and the other was design of schools for safety.
Okay.
And actually, this topic of focus, you weren't talking about focus. You're talking about a platform.
Right.
I think that it's important that students choose something that they care about, because if you care about something, you're going to be disciplined to engage. And once you care about that, you will gain knowledge and become an expert resource on that. So let's say you're very interested in architecture to help solve issues of homelessness. If you begin to have a lot of concern about this, you will become a resource, and that will give you credibility.
Yeah.
And you'll know things about it. And if you are more interested in sustainability, same thing holds. So at the AIA, we've chosen and tried to narrow our platform in the last few years to 6 topics. And when I came in as chair, I felt that the topics were still too broad, that even 90,000 people can't handle and effectively lobby 6 topics. And so we have this thing we're doing called the Big Move, and we're trying to align all of our advocacy efforts around climate change and action on climate change, which is inclusive of a lot of issues of energy reduction and etc. Now, the reality is that you can lobby for changes to the tax code in order to help drive success for climate change.
Mm-hmm.
There's a broad range of things you can lobby within, but when you sort of pick a topic, I think you get some traction.
Right.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting to start to consider the implications of kind of seemingly unrelated or like distant topic, because coming back to kind of student debt, we discussed in our training kind of the implications of the passing of the bill on the profession and people's professional trajectory. And so by no means were we advocating for like, you know, licensure requirements to change or anything, but for a bill like that to be passed, I mean, it would ultimately influence the way people pursue licensure in their careers and what it means for them to have a different kind of like financial experience in their 20s. So I think the really cool thing about that was to realize that to push for something that might be kind of a niche issue within your profession, you don't have to take the niche route.
Mm-hmm.
And you can kind of, if you discover, if you can kind of predict patterns and discover connections, you do like kind of get what you want out of the situation by pushing for something that maybe a wider audience relates to.
Right.
So,
and you can help one another.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for instance, I do know this, that the Senate staff and the House staff tallied the number of constituents who came to the meetings.
Okay, interesting.
And when there's an initiative, they tally the number of telephone calls they get about things.
Mm-hmm.
They tally the emails, and that data is used to help influence decision making.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are passionate about something, Chitika, and then you can get all of your peers to help support that, and then if Ethan is passionate about a different issue and he does the research and can convince you to help, then you can all help each other in your advocacy platforms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's one way to do it, Chip. Awesome. Well, do you guys have anything else really to say about advocacy and different paths to advocacy? Because if not, I think we're good.
I think I would just say one last thing, is that this doesn't have to be a design-related topic.
Yeah, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
It could be, so for instance, on the AIA board, we have one director, she's very interested in issues of workforce development, so her advocacy initiatives really link to equity and diversity in the profession of architecture. And that impacts design because you have more diverse viewpoints in the table, but it's not directly a design topic. So I think there's lots of room for
There's
people.
definitely, the goal with this platform, this podcast that I'm doing, is to definitely explore a lot of different avenues of advocacy. Nowadays, there's so many different, quote unquote, movements. There's a lot of different fields of which advocacy is a huge part of. So that's hopefully the goal in the end. So, yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you guys for joining me. Yeah, thank you guys so much. Thank you all for listening, and thank you for listening to Designing Activism. You can follow kind of the trajectory of this on our Instagram, where I'll be posting some updates. It's the handle's at AIAS_advocacy. That is, once again, AIAS_advocacy. So, all right. Thank you. Bye, guys.